Morning everyone and welcome to the latest edition of On the Whistle, where I'm afraid we've got more Sunderland frustration to talk about after they fell to a late defeat at Sheffield United, going down 1-0. It's kind of a similar theme really to recent videos that we've done, where we're talking about a Sunderland performance with loads of good stuff in it, but where ultimately they've let another opportunity slip by. In this particular case, I think the frustration is even more acute because going into the game, you're looking at Sheffield United's home record with a bit of awe, really. They'd taken 22 points from their 8 games, so they'd only dropped 2 points at home. They'd scored 13 goals and conceded 2. So this looked like a huge challenge for Sunderland, and honestly, for the first half, I thought they played as well as they have done in the circumstances this season. Defensively, really robust, really resilient. I thought they had really good control of the midfield, and that allowed them to just produce a string of really dangerous counter-attacks, really. I thought Tommy Watson, it was a bit of a breakout performance from him. The game obviously suited him, maybe more so than the last couple, where Sunderland were having a lot of counter-attack opportunities, which obviously gave him the opportunity to show what he's all about, which is driving forward, cutting inside, creating opportunities. And up until the penalty miss from Patrick Roberts, I thought that Sunderland were by far the better team. Obviously, the red cards sort of changed the flow of the game for a little while. And then at the start of the second half, I thought that without having quite the same level of dominance in terms of chances created, I thought Sunderland were just about the better side again. I thought it was quite a brave move from Le Bris not to bring another defender on. So Sunderland basically played like a 3 at the back in possession and a 4 at the back out of possession. And the game then was almost by design. I think Sheffield United were happy for Sunderland to have the ball because they wanted to counter. I think they sensed an opportunity out wide with the shape that Sunderland had changed to. So I think that while they were happy for Sunderland to have the ball, I still think Sunderland were playing pretty well, really. Again, and we'll talk about this when we go into your questions later, the persistent theme at the moment, I did think Sheffield United finished the game the stronger. That's not to say that there was anything inevitable about the winner or that it was definitely coming or that Sunderland weren't present in the game. But I think after Issador's big chance in the sort of quite early in the second half, where him and Rig pressed really well into the box, the ball broke and Issador just flashed it wide of the near post. I did think in terms of chances, Sunderland ebbed away a little bit, and that's definitely a concern. So I think again, we're in that position where you have to step back from the games before it and judge the game on its own merits and say that's a performance with a huge amount of positives for Sunderland. I think what they've again shown that they can match any team in this division. That's one of the toughest assignments they've had yet. And I thought large parts of their game were excellent. Don't forget again that they were missing some key players, in the likes of Dennis Cirk and Romain Mundle. So loads to take from the game, but I think you could sense from both Régis Le Bris and the players afterwards that they knew that they'd let a huge opportunity go by them. It's a big 3 points for Sheffield United. I think we can still be really positive about the team going forward while acknowledging that, the longer this run goes on, the more years Sheffield United's, Leeds, Burnley's are going to pull away a little bit at the top. And we know from experience that catching these parachute payment teams when they get out of the lead is going to be really difficult. So a night of mixed emotions really, but ultimately obviously frustration. So thanks again everyone on Blue Sky who sent your questions and comments in, got loads through, which is fantastic. I'm going to stick to using Blue Sky for this. So if you're not on there and you want to get your questions in for On the Whistle and your comments and be part of the conversation, then I'm at Phil Smith Reporter. Right, where do we start? So I've got 2 questions from Carl, which I'm going to start with, so thanks for sending them in, Carl. The first one is, do you feel like Sunderland's points over the last 6 games match the performance levels? I feel like our games have been tight over the season. Just early on, we came out on the winning side of those. We aren't being clinical at both ends right now, which is leaving us unable to break this tough run. Carl, I think from my perspective, you pretty much hit the nail on the head. I think that Sunderland have deserved more points in the last 6 games. I think in some ways it's quite remarkable that they haven't got a single win from those. When you look at the quality of the first half performance against Coventry, if you look at the strength of performance against Millwall, given the players that were out, if you look at last night's performance, I think that there are games within that run. So Preston, I thought, were the better team that night. I think Brian Large Leeds were the better team when the two sides played at Stadium Light. Obviously, Mesley's error sort of bailed Sunderland out a little bit. I think Sunderland's been really unlucky with their points return in that period. I think you're right in what you're saying, that I think the margins have been fairly tight all season. It's not as if Sunderland were, other than Sheffield Wednesday, who I think they did blow away in that first half at the Stadium Light, the games have been pretty tight margins. And I think the point you make is a really good one in that, I think things have levelled out a little bit in terms of, I think Sunderland were just coming out consistently on the right side of tight games, and now they're consistently coming out on not the right side of games. I think that's true. I think the two things that have definitely changed, I think you're absolutely right, Sunderland have been less clinical than they were earlier in the season. If you think of Burnley at home, for example, where they get one real early chance, Romain Mundle buries it, and then they defend brilliantly for the rest of the game. That isn't quite happening at the moment. The other thing I would say is the one thing that has definitely changed is that, Sunderland are definitely, although they're not a team that gives loads of chances to the opposition, I think the defensive structure is still really strong. They are definitely giving up a few more chances than they were in the early parts of the season. If you look back to those kind of opening 4 games before their first national break, they were barely conceding any chances, and that's changed a little bit. So I agree with you, Carl. I think it's mostly just about being clinical in both boxes. I think what we're seeing is Sunderland being a bit less ruthless in their finishing, and because perhaps understandably they haven't been able to maintain those sort of brilliant defensive levels that they had in the first 4 or 5 games of the season, I think it's just caught up with them a little bit. Definitely got the sense from Le Bris after the game that the final third is where he's really kind of stewing at the moment, where he wants to see some improvements. It's going to be really interesting going forward, whether that's in the face, whether that's just something he wants to work on the training ground, or whether he's going to start tinkering things and making some alterations to personnel and partnerships. So that's definitely one to watch. Carl also mentioned, do you think there was anything to read and throw an Aouchiche on at the end regarding his future, or was it just an act of desperation? Had the feeling he would just be isolated until January and then he may be moved on? Yeah, I think from what I can gather over the last sort of few weeks, I think Aouchiche's attitude is kind of impressed everyone behind the scenes, and I think the feeling was that he deserved an opportunity to get a chance. I think obviously Aouchiche has been in a difficult situation where he didn't get into the team at the start of the season. I think it was pretty obvious that Sunderland were happy for him to go. And then Le Bris has used him really sparingly since, in fact, those were his first minutes since deadline day. From all accounts, Aouchiche has done everything right. He's come back. I know he had a little break when some of the players had a break after sort of deadline day and during the international break. Since then, Sunderland have been really impressed with what he's done just in terms of getting his head down, training, hasn't thrown his toys out the pram. He's played in some under-21s games and, gone away to sort of quite unglamorous under-21s fixtures and put a shift in. So I think the feeling has definitely been that he deserved an opportunity. And so I think you can read something into that, Carl, and I think that was a bit of a nod from Le Bris to what he's been doing. Obviously, I think a big part of it was in that stage, and you saw it from Sheffield United's goal. I think Chris Rigg was fatiguing pretty severely, so I think that's why he felt he needed to make a change as well. I'm not reading too much into it. I still think the likely scenario is Aouchiche goes in January. I expect Sunderland to do a bit of their own recruitment. By that point, you'll have Romain Mundle coming back, you'll have Alan Brown coming back. I think you will start to see the opportunities for Aouchiche get squeezed significantly. My expectation would still be that he goes, but I think that Sunderland, felt that he'd earned the right for an opportunity because of the way he's applied himself. And, logic follows in the next few games when Sunderland, I think, is still going to be a bit light in terms of attacking options. There might be some more minutes for him. So I don't think there'll be a huge change. But yeah, I think that's definitely a reward, if you like, for how he's applied himself behind the scenes. So, next question comes from Glenn, who has done some great stats work. Glenn, I'm going to assume you've got this right. I'm going to trust you, and I'm going to put your stat out there. Thanks very much for sending it in. We've only scored 2 goals out of 26 after the 70th minute, yet we've conceded 6 out of 13 at the same time. Does that show a lack of squad depth, lack of trust, or poor tactics? Most games we hardly look like scoring the later the game goes on. Glenn, it's seriously good stats work. I think this is a really interesting debate, and I agree to a large extent. The one caveat I would put forward in Sunderland and Régis Le Bris' defences, consistently what we saw through the first part of the season was that Sunderland was scoring first in games. If you think back, Portsmouth, Cardiff, Sheffield Wednesday, Burnley, Middlesbrough, even Watford and Plymouth, Sunderland took the lead, didn't they? I hope I haven't got that wrong. I feel like I've done a lot of games recently. So I think it's inevitable to an extent when you're consistently leading in games that the other team is going to be on top towards the end, because you have the luxury of being able to sit in, keep your shape and break. So I think that's a big part of why that's happened. I do also agree with you, though, that I think the squad depth is massive. I thought this was yet another game, and I'm almost bored of talking about it, but it's still relevant. We talk about it on every single video, it feels like. It was another game where the opposition clearly finished the game in the ascendancy. I'm really struggling to think of a game in which Sunderland have been able to turn it later on and finish right in the ascendancy. Maybe if you think there's one out there that I've forgotten, stick it in the comments, because I'd be really interested to get people's opinions on that. But I think it's a consistent theme where Sunderland struggle to turn games and the opposition finish it in the ascendancy. I think for me, primarily, Glenn, it is a lack of trust, a little bit harsh, because I think a lot of the time, I think it's a fair call from Le Bris in terms of the inexperience he's got on his bench. I think it's really difficult to bring on players with next to no championship experience in a really tight game like last night's, for example. We should also say that Le Bris did make 4 subs in the end last night, which is unusually an unusually large number for him. He actually said in his pre-match press conference, which I thought was interesting, I'll relate to you, I did do a little piece on the Echo, but in case you haven't seen it, saying that he does feel like now, he used his defence as an example where he's now got a lot of options. It's basically saying that his lack of substitutions isn't by design. It's something that he thinks fans will see start to change, and he will be more proactive moving forward. But I definitely think it's a big issue. I think it's primarily a lack of depth. Obviously, injuries have been a big factor in that. But I'm just going to chuck in another question, because I think it's on this theme. So thanks, Mark, for sending this in. We're playing well but not getting the rewards. It feels like something is missing. Well, that's something come in January. Again, I think January is going to be really, really important. I totally accept the argument Le Bris has made in terms of saying that there's a lot of players who could come back to fitness by January. Abdullahi, Samed, Paveda, Mundell, Brown, and in that sense he's got quite a full squad. If that happens and they're all back fit and everyone in the squad is fit and firing, then maybe January doesn't look so massive. But at the moment now, I think we're consistently seeing Sunderland struggle to finish games on top. I think we're struggling to see them turn their level of performance into wins. And I do think that means there needs to be a bit of an injection of competition, depth and quality in January if Sunderland are going to keep the pace. I think there's loads to be positive about. I'm certainly not panicking because they haven't won in 6. I think you have to be objective about last night's performance and say how good it was for large parts. But I definitely think that, for me, that's shaping up to be a really important window. Yes, there's a chance that by that point the squad is full and looks fantastic, and if that's the case, happy days. But the experience of the season so far suggests it might not be as simple as just getting everyone back fit and firing at the same time. So, yeah, let's see how it develops. Just on that theme, Shiny Tom says, why is he reluctant to use his bench, always reactive and never proactive? Taking off Watson, who was causing problems when Rig had faded. Yeah, I think that the Watson one was really, really frustrating because he was so dominant. I understand the context of that in terms of he was obviously tiring. It was his 3rd start in 6 days, which at senior level is not anything like what he's faced before in the past. So I was frustrated with that one, but I understood it. But I agree with you that Rig was tired as well. So that didn't really work, pulling them over to the left. It wasn't, it's definitely something to watch moving forward. Like, as I say, Le Bris has kind of said that he thinks Sunderland fans will see him be more proactive and use his bench more now that he's getting more options. It's going to be really interesting whether he sticks to that, because at the moment, I definitely think that's a persistent issue. I've got 2 comments on a similar theme here, so I'll chuck them in together. Thanks for sending them in. Chris says, thought RLB was as animated and annoyed as I've ever seen last night. An undeserved defeat after 2 games where fine margins meant 2 points rather than 6. Or was it general annoyance that we are blowing our lines in front of goal? Stu says, not a question as such, but that fire in RLB's belly in the post-match interview was really good to see. I hope this is a turning point in our season. We were superb tonight. It came away with nothing. Need to use that frustration positively. Yeah, I agree with you both. Le Bris, by the time he come to do his media commitments with me, it probably cooled off a little bit and was probably a little bit more like his usual self. But I think, as well, speaking from Luke 09, I think definitely there was a level of frustration that we haven't necessarily seen with some of the recent results, both from Le Bris and the dressing room. I think it's interesting to me because I think, going back to my previous question about, I know on previous videos there was a bit of frustration. Le Bris is, kind of downplaying the January window. I think that you've got to be, I think Le Bris is too cute to sort of give away a headline about, I need this in January, I want this in January. I think sometimes, you can be a little bit cuter and see some of his other body language and some of the way he talks about other issues. When you see about the frustration he talks about last night about the squad depth, when you see the frustration about not turning good play into goals in the final third, I think he's given you a little bit of a clue that while he might be too clever to sort of get drawn into and give a big headline about putting the pressure on speaking for January recruits and that kind of thing, he is feeling that frustration for sure. And I definitely think that he gave the impression that he wants to win, changing things up a little bit, as I say, whether that's personnel in the short term, whether it's an injection of quality in January. But I agree with you, there was a real sense of frustration from the players and the manager last night that they didn't get what they deserved out of the game. And I agree, let's hope that puts some real fire in their belly. 3 tricky games coming up when they return to action. but not 3 sort of insurmountable games. If Sunderland want to be genuine promotion contenders, it's 3 games that they really have to attack. So let's hope they can use that frustration as kind of fuel on the fire. Ian says, not a question as such, but I think tonight demonstrates we can live and dominate the better and richer teams in the league with a very young team. They should no fear. It is all great experience and they should get better for it. Patience is the key. Keep the faith. Yeah, I think that's a really fair comment, Ian. I think we can acknowledge all the frustration from the game while also acknowledging there were loads of positives, especially, as you say, with many of those young players acquitting themselves really well against the top opposition. So thanks for your comment, Ian. I think that's a fair thing to say. Also had a couple of comments here about Patrick Roberts and his output, which I think is fair. Obviously, a bit of a sort of the headline of missing the penalty, but wasn't his best night. Listen, I talked a bit about Roberts earlier in the season, and I absolutely stand by it. I think his goal and assist output, albeit his goal was from a penalty or from open play, was decent through the opening stretch of the season. And as I've said before, if you look back and go through Sunderland's first 15, 20 goals, you'll find that Roberts is at the heart of so many of those moves. I thought he had a great start to the season. Undeniably, the last couple of games, I think he's come off the boil a little bit. And I thought even taken away from the penalty, I thought last night wasn't his best performance. So whereas, previously when people have asked me about Roberts, I've not even really considered taking him out of the team because broadly I think his contribution's been good and he hasn't always had the stats, necessarily the headline stats, to show that. The last couple of games definitely he hasn't been at his best, and and I think Mienda has shown in the last few games when he's come off on the right that he's a really dangerous player. So I definitely think that's one to watch moving forward. I've no doubts Roberts will come again. I think he's got a massive part to play in the season. I thought you saw us at the start of the season how good he is. Long championship season, it happens. Players come in and out of form. It's very difficult for them to be at their absolute peak physical and condition and play at their best for 46 games. So I think Roberts will come again, but for sure, I think in a way that I wasn't considering would, Le Bris make a change on that front in the next week or so. I probably would have said no until the last couple of games, but I do think maybe we'll see a bit of rotation in the next couple of weeks. Let's see. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there because I've been talking at you for quite a long time. Thanks so much for sticking with me. Again, I'm a Phil Smith reporter on Blue Sky, so I'm taking the questions on the whistle in your comments and posting most of my updates and stuff. So thanks so much for sending your questions in. Sorry that it was another video of frustration. Hopefully we'll be able to talk about a win when I see you in a week or so. Cheers.